Welcome to today's AT&T CyberThreat Report for November 10th, 2011. Joining us today, we have Jim Clausing. Jim Clausing is our lead malware analyst. Welcome, Jim. And what are you planning to discuss today?
There are two things I wanted to talk about today. One of them is a little update on the Duqu that we had talked about a few weeks ago. And then I also wanted to talk about a couple of the Microsoft patches from earlier this week.
Great. And we have John Hogoboom. John is a lead security analyst. Welcome, John. What do you plan to discuss today?
Hey, Brian. Today I'm going to talk about a particular sample, an email sample that actually has malware in it or leads you to malware. And it was a more interesting than usual sample, so I wanted to cover it kind of quickly. And I'm also going to cover kind of the trends we're seeing in our spam probes and what we see coming into our spam bins and the types of malware that we're seeing detected, since it's kind of a related topic.
Okay, great. It'll be interesting to see what the trends are. And we also have Dave Gross here today. Dave is a senior incident response analyst. He's also the lead for our malware analysis activities. Welcome, Dave. What are you planning to talk about today?
Thanks, Brian. I'm going to talk about something that happened a couple days ago where Apple kicked a security researcher out of its developer program. And, there's controversy here, so we'll look at different sides and discuss it.
Oh, it'll be, we always like controversy, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm Brian Rexroad. I'll cover the Internet Weather Report as well as I'd like to lead in with a little bit of a discussion about a recent takedown that FBI has initiated. And actually, I'm showing just a segment from the FBI's website on the screen here. And basically what happened was there is this, in fact, we've talked about it on previous programs, this notion of a DNS changer Trojan. And it's accompanied with other malware, so it's generally as a part of a botnet. And what this malware does is effectively changes what DNS servers computers will point to resolve DNS. And in this case, it would point to some rogue DNS servers, basically DNS servers that would substitute certain domain names and provide basically a rogue response or an incorrect response to a DNS lookup. And they were using this to perform fraudulent advertising activity on web pages. So whereas a normal machine would see, the normal web page with advertising that's associated with that, somebody that has this infection would go to the same web page, but they see different advertising that was associated with the fraudulent advertising associated with this. Now, what the FBI has done here is they've taken down those rogue DNS servers, replaced them with some substitute DNS servers that will be there for a temporary period of time, and they've also made some arrests associated with the perpetrators behind this. And so it will be interesting to see how this develops in the future. And there are obviously going to be a number of organizations that have individuals with their computers that have infections that need to get straightened out. And eventually those replacement DNS servers are going to go away. A consequence of that is that anybody that remains infected after they go away, and I think it's planned for around the March timeframe, is they will lose DNS resolution, and it may appear that they have lost Internet service. So there'll be work underway to try to get individuals that are affected by this notified and work through a remediation process. So there's big news about this, and it's in almost all of the press. So if you do a search on DNS Changer and with FBI, you'll see a lot of information about what's going on there. And FBI has done some things with a public service announcement to help guide individuals through the process of remediating this malware.
So, hey, Brian, I have a question on this one. And I haven't really taken a close look at, because, this kind of went down yesterday, and I haven't really read up on it. But is the FBI or law enforcement doing anything with, they took down these rogue DNS servers, and I guess, is there some replacement ones that are put in place? And if so, do they redirect the people that were using the rogue DNS that are now going to a law enforcement-based one to present some kind of web page to them or something and let them know that they're infected?
There's nothing. Well, first of all, yes. What they've done is they've physically replaced the rogue DNS servers with good ones. And they're actually even hosted in the same facility where the old ones were operating, but they replaced those servers so that they would be able to provide good answers to DNS. And that was facilitated actually through third parties. So an organization has been set up to help with that and to facilitate operating those DNS servers on behalf of FBI. So it's not FBI really running those servers. It's somebody that's doing it to help them. And in the context of doing that, there is discussion about what could be done to help notify victims, and there has not been a full resolution on that at this point. But there certainly is the plan to, at the very least, provide information to ISPs so ISPs can help to contact customers and let them know that they've been affected by this so they can work out getting that straightened out and moved on. The notion of injecting answers within the DNS, it's not clear that that's within the purview of what they have the right to do at this point. There is some discussion about doing some things along those lines.
Do we know if there's a particular part of the world where these rogue DNS servers were? Because I know that we've known of some pockets of them, and I was wondering where these ones were from.
Yeah, well, actually, it turns out that the servers themselves were hosted in the United States, which helps to facilitate the takedown. And I guess, in two respects here, it was a little surprising because some of those addresses were actually registered outside the United States. The perpetrators here that have been arrested, I believe they were all located in Estonia, and but the servers were, in fact, located in the United States, have been for some time. And so they were able to seize those servers and do the replacement.
Yeah, but some of the address space was stuff that we've known for many years was hiding a lot of malicious traffic, and the address space is supposed to be assigned to places in other countries, but they were tunneling it back into the U.S.
Yeah. So with that, this is an interesting case. I think we'll see how things develop over time. One thing I should point out is those infected machines, they've taken down the DNS servers, the rogue DNS servers, but those machines are still infected. They still are potentially part of a botnet, in fact, most likely part of a botnet, and there may be changes that could occur there. They haven't taken out the whole operation, but at least putting a ding or a dent in the operation is, I think, sending the right message that this isn't something that's going to continue to be tolerated.
And when you say the machines that are infected, you're talking about the end-user machines, not these DNS machines that they've taken out of service.
Absolutely, Dave. Yeah, it's the end-user machines that are using these now good DNS servers. Absolutely. So with that, let me pass it over to Jim here. And Jim, what's up with Duqu at this point?
Thanks, Brian. We first mentioned Duqu a couple of weeks ago, a month ago, something like that. And at the time, Symantec had put out a report suggesting that the authors of Duqu had access to the source code of Stuxnet, perhaps, and they laid out a good case for it. And a week or two later, some researchers at SecureWorks came back and said, no, they didn't think so. They didn't think it was really related. It had a few things in common. And this little table that I put up here from the SecureWorks report, their argument on why they don't think that they were related. And I happen to know researchers at both places, at SecureWorks and at Symantec, and I have great respect for them. And one of the things that this just brought to mind was how how difficult some of this work is, and how one group of people can reach one conclusion and another group can reach a completely different conclusion looking at pretty much the same set of data. And what we do in malware analysis is at least as much art as science, I think. So folks that I respect came to completely different conclusions on this. But yeah, the Duqu malware is still somewhat sophisticated, and one of the interesting things that I hadn't really heard discussed when we first brought this up a few weeks ago, but has been discussed some since then, is that the initial dropper, the initial installer, exploited a zero-day vulnerability in a kernel component that parsed true-type fonts. And this Microsoft just acknowledged this early last week, so not enough time to get it patched with the round of patches that just came out this week. But one of the things that is worrisome about this is, and Microsoft did release a tool, a fix-it tool, that basically disabled some of the true-type font parsing stuff. Because one of the issues is, if anybody else was aware of this particular vulnerability, it looks like it would have been possible to exploit via a web page, or somebody browsing, looking at documents on a share. So this is one to be concerned about, and I suspect that Microsoft is working really hard on this and probably will patch this one next month. I point out that this was not fixed with MS11-084 that was released earlier this week, which was also a vulnerability in the TrueType font parsing. And that one had been, at least a proof of concept existed for that one that exploited it via a web page. So anyway, so Duqu does have this 0-day, and that one was being held kind of tightly. I haven't actually seen the document has this exploit in it, but Microsoft is supposedly working pretty hard on that, and I have no reason to believe that they're not.
Interesting aspect of this, and that aside from the sophistication of the malware itself, the fact that it's taking advantage of a zero-day vulnerability, kind of buried in the operating system of Windows here, kind of sort of exemplifies a little bit of the sophistication associated with that. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's, modern operating systems are so complex, there are a lot of them out there that we don't know about. And, this one was taking advantage of font parsing vulnerability, so you could embed it in a document. My understanding is that it was originally dropped in a Word document with the embedded fonts in it. There's a black market out there for sharing these 0 days, and a lot of them out there that I'm sure we don't know about yet.
Yeah, and I think in the past we've seen situations where the botnets are kind of modular, and so as new exploits come out, they can just insert those new exploits and still have their communication vectors and everything else intact.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of communications vectors here, if I understand correctly, the controller was originally, associated with Duqu, was originally located in India. I believe that had been taken down. In fact, I think the server had been seized, if I remember reading correctly.
Right.
And I think that's since been moved to, is it Belgium?
Belgium, I think, is what
right.
Traffic will move to Belgium.
So Duqu certainly is still sort of alive, as it seems.
Yeah, as far as I know, I don't believe that they've completely shut down the controllers on it. The original group that captured it, I think, was in Poland, and the samples that they got were targeted at a particular multinational organization that had presence in India and Poland and Belgium, and so when they took the original controller in India down and it moved to Belgium, that wasn't surprising.
And I don't think it uses any kind of fully qualified domain name that I'm aware of, does it, for resolving to that IP address?
I don't remember.
I'm not sure either, but probably need to take a closer look at that, make sure that we're monitoring it properly.
All right, thanks for the update there, Jim. So what's happening with you've sort of touched on it a little bit. Any other things of interest here with the recent Microsoft patches?
Right, there was the MS11-084 that fixed another vulnerability in the TrueType font parsing. But the most interesting patch released this week with the Microsoft patch bundle was the MS11-083. And this one was actually kind of scary because it could be potentially exploited to do remote code execution by sending a UDP packet to a closed port. So sending malicious UDP packets to a machine on a port that the machine isn't listening on. The vulnerability was in a counter in the TCP/IP stack, and so that one is really kind of scary. Now, this blog post by the Microsoft Security Research Group suggests that this is probably a really difficult one to exploit, and so we're not really likely to see, a worm created out of this one. But if anybody is able to, by spending more time on it, if anyone is able to repeatably exploit this one, then I suppose it could be turned into a worm. But when I first read the explanation or the description of the vulnerability when the bulletin came out, that was the first thing that struck me is, this one is primed to be turned into a worm because it's fire it at a closed port. Well, every machine out there has a bunch of ports that it's not listening on. And so, if you could exploit this and do remote code execution, you could execute something with root or system-level privileges on a machine by sending packets to a port that it wasn't listening on. That's really one of the scariest kind of vulnerabilities out there. Now, fortunately, as I said, the Microsoft guys and other folks that I trust that have been looking closely at this think it'll be difficult. But it scared me when I first read it.
Yeah. So, Jim, maybe Dave, maybe you can help me with this because I'm, right now I'm kind of, if I had hair, I'd be pulling it out right now. Mm-hmm. There was actually a case that's very similar to this that occurred a number of years ago where it was actually, in fact, there was a worm that was exploiting a closed port. It was actually on a computer-based firewall, basically a host-based firewall, that any port that was closed could be used to gain privileges, exploit the machine, and subsequently it did turn into a worm. And for the life of me, I can't remember the name of it. It was around the 2003 timeframe. So I'm going to have to pull out the archives. Dave, do you happen to remember what it was?
I don't remember the name of it, but I do remember what you're talking about. We were really involved in that at the time.
Yeah, so this is certainly within the realm of possibility. It was a case where it was a closed UDP port. They were able to use that to exploit the machine, and there was a worm associated with that. I'm going to have to dig it up. I'll get an update next time.
Yeah, and it does look like this one, the current one, would be capable of crashing the machine. So it would be capable of DDoS, even if you couldn't turn it into a worm and actually exploit the machine. You could cause a lot of annoyance by crashing machines.
Well, anyway, the short takeaway from this is definitely one you want to apply to your Windows systems as soon as possible.
Yes.
All right, very good. Thank you. So let's go ahead and move over to John here. I think you were going to talk to us a little bit about some recent spam Trojan and some of the trends we're seeing with inbound spam. All right?
That's right. So yesterday, actually, we got an interesting sample in. It's a little bit more interesting. Usually we get a lot of samples, and this one was a little bit more interesting than usual in that this spam here. We have an example of this spam sample here. It's basically purporting to be from the Internal Revenue Service, saying that you need to apply for a new employer identification number. Blah blah blah. The website for the link here is actually a legitimate website. They seem to have been compromised. It has since been remediated, so I couldn't get a lot of good screenshots today, but yesterday I was actually able to get the payload to install and execute. The thing that's interesting about this one is initially when you go to it, it's a legitimate web server, as I said. It's been since remediated. The initial payload is a web page with a lot of obfuscated JavaScript in it. That, when it decodes, actually runs several Java applets inside your browser. And it's using the Java, the Oracle, formerly Sun Java virtual machine. It's exploiting some type of exploit in there. I didn't get a chance to actually pull it apart to figure out how it's doing this yet. But in the long and short of it is it engages in a couple of very typical behaviors. This looks like the downloader part of this Trojan. And what it does is it retrieves a few additional payloads via HTTP from a few websites that I'm going to list in a following slide here. One of the other interesting things I thought, besides the fact that it's using Java as one of its components for exploit here, is it additionally goes out and uses SMB, Windows file sharing, and it connects to a Windows file share on a remote machine. I forgot exactly where it is. I don't remember the country that it's in. But it connects to it, and it retrieves a file off of there, another payload that it extracts off of there. That's one that normally, usually we see FTP, HTTP a lot, mostly HTTP, sometimes FTP. Very rarely that we see SMB used as a means to go get additional payloads off of the system. It does a lot of the typical things that we see with malware. It sets up a run registry key, which almost all of them do in HT current user software, Microsoft Windows current version run. And it drops a ZBot Trojan, which is Zeus. We're all familiar with Zeus. Zeus is very frequently spammed in emails, so this is not unusual. The thing that's unusual to me is the way this one installs automatically without any user intervention. So that's the key here. Just by opening and clicking on that URL, opening that link in your browser, automatically started the Java applets up and executed this payload to infect your machine via some exploit. Most of the time, the Zeus ones we see in spam emails that arrive to you, they're usually not trying to do anything this crafty. They're usually sending it to you as an executable right in the email as an attachment or in a zip file where the exe has been in a zip file or something like that. So this one is a little bit craftier than usual, employing some techniques I hadn't seen. As I said, drops a ZBot Trojan into a random directory name under your document settings, username, application data subdirectory, makes a random named directory there with a random file name.exe. So it's going to be different for everybody. And then it stores your harvested login credentials that it's capturing while you're browsing to various websites, which is what Zeus does. And it stores them in a file, and it's with a random a different directory with a random name, and I'm sorry, this is not a .exe. It's a different name. I forget what the extension is, but it's a file that it stores the harvested login credentials. That's a typo in there.
John.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. A couple observations so far here. I'm sorry for the interruption, but
Sure.
First of all, you just got off the page where it showed that it was using SMB for outbound. I think one of the things that I think is pertinent here is oftentimes we see organizations that are so fundamentally concerned about inbound policy for their firewalls, they're not paying as close attention to outbound policy for firewalls. This is a case where the fact that that is open up just facilitates malware like this to do what it wants to do with less constraints. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to sort of point out that inbound and outbound firewall policies are important to a good security policy. Go ahead.
I was going to say, additionally to that, a lot of corporations, they have instrumentation such as proxies or other types of network blocking on HTTP. So there's a lot of stuff around that to block malicious websites and URLs and locations, but not so much, like you said, on other types of protocols, particularly SMB, which you don't see very often.
Yeah, so the other observation here is in the spam message itself. Trying to prompt for getting a new employer ID. That tells me that this isn't targeted toward end users. This isn't individuals they're going after. They're going after businesses.
That's possible. I don't know how many. This sample came to me from a separate source, third-party source. And I can say that, which we're going to talk about in a minute, in our spam probe trends of just general spam that gets sent out to the world, I did not see this email in there. So you're probably right that this was kind of a targeted type of event. However, it's strange to me that it drops a Zeus payload, because that's kind of...
it's clear that Zeus has not just been going after end users. They're going after businesses. I'm not going to try to categorize whether this is... my guess here is that this would probably be most effective against a small business where there's somebody that would be looking at this employer ID number aspect of this and become a victim in that sense. And, it's a case where businesses are conducting lots of financial transactions, and if they can get a handle into that and start squeezing in some of their own activities, it's probably something that's a little less heavily or closely monitored, a little more difficult to do the analysis on than your typical credit card fraud activities. And so I don't, Zeus, as you've pointed out before, is a toolkit. This may be a group that's going after a particular segment. To me, it looks like they're going after businesses here. So businesses need to pay attention to this sort of thing.
Okay. It's a good point, and you're probably right about that. I hadn't made that connection. Virus Total, as of just before this call, which Virus Total is a service, virustotal.com, you can go take a look. Very poorly detected, only 7 of 43 antivirus vendors detect it as anything. McAfee and Kaspersky do pick it up as a ZBot. Some other ones here pick it up as some type of password stealer, which it is. That's what Zeus is. I'm not really sure what this Trojan generic KDV is, but some other vendors are picking it up as something, but maybe they're just not quite sure what it is yet. These are definitely malicious. I excluded the one that was the hacked legitimate website from this list, but if you see activity at any of these, the primary activity is happening at this westfiber.com, which has been since taken down. The IP no longer resolves, and the actual web server, which was at this IP address, and also is acting as that SMB file server as well. Both of these have been taken down, so if they hadn't been, I would have gotten you some better screenshots of the Trojan in action, but unfortunately I couldn't do that. Moving along, I figured it might be good to take a look at, since I kind of cross-referenced against some of our, we collect spam on a regular basis into some spam probe accounts, and we do some parsing on this to see what kind of subjects, what kind of malicious attachments, which kind of malicious URLs, et cetera, are in those spam emails. And I thought it would be interesting to take a look at least the past week or so, which is what this is. It's actually the past 10 days or so of spam that we've seen and what type of detections that we're picking up. Now, these ones are detections that happen before you ever get the email. So for the most part, these are things that the email delivery agent is scanning your email, and before it delivers it to you, picks up that there might be an attachment in here or something malicious and rips it out of the email and then sends you the rest of it or sends you some kind of notification about that email. Bloodhound RL Trap in particular, this is not really a particular type of malware so much as it is a technique. So this is a heuristic detection that says that this email was trying to coerce the user into performing an action that would get them infected, either by opening an attachment or browsing to a URL that's known to be bad. So that's why we see most of those here. When I actually took a look at these, on the next page, I think I have some examples. Most of these are Zeus attachments, Zbot or Zeus as another name. For the most part, there were a few others in there. I didn't get to take a look at what those actual ones were. But we'll go take a look at some of the subject lines of those so you can kind of get familiarized with some of those trends. Shepville is another one. I forget how this one works, but we have seen quite a bit of these. And then we have some suspicious PDF JavaScript ones. That's kind of our own detection, where it's a PDF file that has JavaScript in it. We're not quite sure if it's malicious or not, but we're seeing that's something that you just want to be wary of, open PDF files that have executable code inside. And then there's some others in here. Dromedon is another one that I kind of flagged as looking at some of the subject lines there. And fake AV, Zbot, when it is detected, is that's usually where they actually attach the attachment right in the email. And there's a few others here as well.
So, John, I just want to understand here, all of these that you were talking about on the previous page, those were emails with attachments. Either attachments or techniques in there that looks like, I have to look at some of these RL trap ones a little more closely. Most of them look like attachments to me, okay. But I think they might also have some techniques in there that they're looking heuristically for, you know, either some kind of URLs or perhaps even some kind of phishing tactics. I'm not sure. We have to take a closer look at what this heuristic detection really is doing. Okay, but other than that one, the rest of these are ones where the email came with an attachment. Yes, yeah. And I believe that's the case in all of these, yeah. And you'll notice a lot of them are downloaders as well. So when you see these downloaders, generally like Shepville and Dromedon, they are not really the malware itself, so to speak. It's more of a delivery agent. So a lot of malware is delivered by some kind of downloader, which is a small little payload that goes and gets the bigger piece of malware or multiple pieces of malware to your machine and infect you. That's generally what you pick up in email attachments because they want to kind of keep them small. They don't want to send a giant, not that most malware is giant, but they like to keep a small little downloader attachment in there.
Yeah, I think just as an example, you know, we talked a little bit earlier about that DNS changer. DNS changer is not the delivery mechanism. In this case, your delivery mechanism would be one of these downloaders. Once the machine is infected with the downloader, it's told to go out and retrieve various types of malware or Trojans that would perform other functions. You had an example earlier related to, I guess it was the Panda example, which was a case where it's basically a password grabber. The DNS changer Trojan is another one where we take that, and then that would change DNS settings on the machine. And there, in fact, may be multiple organizations or groups that are, I'll put it in quotes, benefiting from the different pieces of Trojan malware that's put on the machine once the download is there. Is that right?
Yeah,
go ahead, Jim.
Well, that's just one of the reasons why for a long time always recommended if you got infected not to try to disinfect it, but to re-image and start over from scratch, because we get these initial downloaders on there. Once the first one is on there, how many more pieces of malware does it install, and how many of them are going to be caught? Just because you've caught the first 6 pieces of malware doesn't mean you've caught all of them, and so it's really tough once the machine gets infected. Got these downloaders that can download dozens of additional pieces of malware.
Yeah, and that's very typical. Because a lot of these pieces of malware, they even have like pay-per-install types of programs for some of the larger ones out there. So these guys who write downloaders are not necessarily. They'll use a downloader to get that on the machine, and then they'll get like an affiliate ID with one of those malware vendors, and they'll start installing multiple pieces of malware on their victim machines so that they can maximize their return on their pay-per-install type of operation that they're running. So just because you get hit with something doesn't mean you're only getting one piece of malware. You're probably getting multiple things downloaded onto your machine, all of which may not be detected, as Jim mentioned. So reinstalling is always the best bet if you can do that.
Just out of curiosity here, do you have an idea what just order of magnitude, what is the sample size that you used for this?
For this particular, it was the past 10 days, and I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I think it was probably about 400 or 500 attachments or email messages that had attachments in them.
Okay, so this is, I think, on the order of tens of thousands of emails that are sampled, a subset of those that actually had attachments and how they were categorized within those attachments. Is that correct?
Right, that's right.
Okay.
And this comes from accounts that we have set up which shouldn't be receiving email because they're not known. They're not real email accounts, and we get feeds of anything that comes into it is basically suspect. So that's why we analyze them, because they're not real email addresses. The Bloodhound RL trap types, these are the ones that have some heuristic detection. What we're seeing is there's these were all, from what I recall, had attachments in them, the ones I looked at here. But here's a sampling of some of them here. The types of subject lines: intercompany invoices is a theme going on here. United Postal Service, again, we've mentioned this is a very common tactic. UPS and FedEx are often incorrectly or falsely used as a tactic to trick someone into opening an attachment. It's not really from UPS or FedEx. So that's a tactic that they're using here. For the Shepville ones, we actually got a big run on them. I think it was earlier in the week, not so much lately, but we had a giant volume. And that's why I guess in one day we actually had tons of them come into the system. So there must have been a big campaign going that day. Most of them are related to IRS types of topics. Again, they're not from the IRS. That's who they're purporting to be from. I didn't really look at the topics in here, but there is some kind of attachment inside of here that is trying to download something using the Shepville downloader.
Looking at the spam, you've emphasized a couple of times that they're not actually from, in this case, IRS. When we looked at the spam example earlier, you don't necessarily have to go back to it, but it was pretty obvious that the from address was not an IRS address, and the URL associated with that didn't look very U.S. government oriented as well. Right.
And actually, I think it was in India or something was the domain, or somewhere else like that. I can't remember. I'd have to go back. But in any event.
Some of them do forge legitimate-looking from addresses, too, and as long as they can get it to an SMTP server that'll relay it for them, rejected. So sometimes the from address makes it pretty obvious, but not always.
Yep. And lastly, I mean, we could go over all of them. I just figured I'd grab a few of the ones that had a sizable number of hits. Dropidin is another type of downloader we've seen in a bunch of the spams over the past week. The subject lines of those related to your tax payment ID or United States Postal Service delivery failure notification. Again, not from those real sources. But again, a very common theme. We're seeing lots of mail, like traditional shipping services being used as a cover to try to trick you into opening an attachment inside those emails. So that's kind of the trends we're seeing. I'm going to try to, this I actually put together in like 20 minutes before the call. So maybe next week I'll try to do this on a more regular basis so we can kind of see how those trends change over time. That's all I really have for today.
And in terms of people protecting themselves from something like that, I guess one of the things you could do is look at the subject line and go to a search page and search for that, or look for some of these, say that the subject line in quotes and then maybe fraud or something like that, because a lot of times these things have been seen before and there are pages describing what goes on and stuff like that. So if you're concerned about it, look for some of these keywords and see if there's something similar that's already been reported.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're receiving emails, and we say this all the time, but if you're getting emails from people you don't know and they have attachments in them, please don't open them.
Yeah.
I don't know how much clearer to make it. I think most people know that, so I'm hoping that that's the case. But in any event.
Right. And in some cases, like the ones you have up on the screen now, U.S. Post Office delivery failure notification, in some cases, how does the post office have your email address? How would they know to notify you there? So, try to use some logic there. Does that vendor have that connection where they can find you specifically through your email?
Right.
And the other thing that we've said before, my personal preference is to read email in plain text, because if you've got all the fancy, graphics and stuff, you can embed JavaScript and that kind of stuff in there, and you can be infected just by opening the email, looking at it without even clicking on anything in those cases. So be very careful about the format in which you read the email initially.
Tim, you're just saying that because of the TrueType font vulnerabilities that came up recently.
Well, that was another reminder.
I'm just kidding you here. So thanks very much, Don. That was a nice perspective that we haven't taken a look at previously. Next thing, Dave. Apple's been pretty good with controlling what gets into that market. What's going on now?
All right, thanks, Brian. Basically what happened was Charlie Miller, who has been known to, he's a security researcher, and he's found a lot of vulnerabilities in a lot of different Apple products, iOS and so on. And he's worked with Apple, shared, the information back with them so that they could close these vulnerabilities. Basically what happened here is that he found another vulnerability in the iOS operating system. This one allows you to run unapproved code. Normally, the way Apple has set things up, you have to have the signed piece of code before the iOS will run it. Well, he found a way around that, and so that was the thing that he was attempting to exploit. He wrote an app that seemed to be legitimate. It was to look up stock prices and stuff like that, but it had hidden in it the ability to run this unsigned code. And he submitted it to the Apple Store, got them to review it, didn't reveal that it had this malicious side to it, and got Apple to sign it. So basically, it was in the Apple Store as an app that people could download. And when you downloaded it, it would go out and contact his server to see if there was any unsigned code that he wanted to run. So he had told Apple that there was this vulnerability, and he had this in the App Store, and so because of the fact that he didn't tell them that there was this malicious side of it, he misrepresented what his app actually did. And so because of that, they immediately revoked his credentials from the developer program. And, it's sending a clear message that you can't get away with misrepresenting the apps that you put in the store. On the other hand, he's a valuable researcher that's helped to find a lot of vulnerabilities within their code, and they should want to be able to work with him to find more vulnerabilities and close them. But there's controversy here in terms of whether they should have kicked him out of the program or whether they should have found some other means to deal with him, or if they can work with him now or whatever. But it was just an interesting thing that happened here, that they decided very quickly when they realized that there was this malicious piece to this code that they kicked him out.
So, Dave, did he at least put $1 million price tag on that app so it wouldn't get distributed very far?
No, I don't know for sure, but I believe the app was free.
So there are probably a few things. I mean, hindsight is 20/20. This is a situation, and we can only conjecture about what Charlie Miller's thought process was about this. Clearly, to really test the process, he would not have been able to tell the folks that he was submitting that app to that he was doing something that was going to effectively test the effectiveness of their validation process. That is, he was using apparently a legitimate aspect of an app to create functionality that was not anticipated or not intended. So that, in effect, was the vulnerability, if I understand this correctly. And I think you had explained this to me a little bit about how it is related to the fact that some of the code, I think JavaScript code, needed to be compiled on the fly, and so it couldn't really have a signature associated with that specific function. And so in order to really test the process, he could not really tell them. Now, perhaps he could have told another organization or another part of Apple that he was going to test this process or worked out some kind of arrangement that way so that he wouldn't lose his privileges. But in any case, it is, I think, as you're sort of pointing out here, unfortunate that Charlie Miller's been kicked out because he has been pretty good about this, but perhaps there was another way to do it.
Right. Well, I mean, he may have been able to submit the app to them as a security report and have Apple sign it and see that it worked that way without actually putting it up in the Apple Store and making it available. But I don't know what would have sufficed and what wouldn't. But basically, it was clear that he, or at least what Apple was saying, is that he violated the terms of his agreement, because it's clear in the agreement that you can't misrepresent the application that you're submitting to the store.
And in my opinion, that is a good policy to have.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, very good, Dave. Thanks very much. And let's go ahead and move into the weather report for today. In the last week or so here, there are some items that I think are worthy of discussion, but I wanted to sort of start out by pointing out, typically when we're looking at severe events, we're looking at the multiples of thousands, and we only have a couple of things on here where they're, really significantly large. The first one here, I generally don't report on cases where we're looking at denial of service attacks. Generally, that's what we're looking at on the first line here, which is basically increases in flows. A lot of times these are, typically sort of what I've described as mundane denial of service attacks that are, I guess we would consider a nuisance. The victims don't consider it really a nuisance. They don't like it very much at all. But it is a common occurrence on the Internet. But what I'll focus on a little bit more here is some of these other activities, just to give you a little bit of an idea of what's going on with these. We had some activity on TCP destination port 65535. Turns out that's denial of service attack activity as well. We've had a couple of examples that are similar to this in the past, so I'll take a look at that. It's not a significant concern from a security standpoint, so I've marked it with a yellow arrow. Certainly it is for the victims, but the cause of this is partly because these victims apparently are under mitigation. Some of the more sort of interesting ones, there's scanning activity on destination port 0 TCP. We'll take a little closer look at that one because that has some interesting attributes. The next one, which is a yellow item, not really a security threat in my opinion. This is UDP destination port 3074 activity. That's registered to Xbox, and in fact the activity does look like gaming-related activity. I marked it yellow because it wasn't there traditionally. It shows up as an anomaly. So the fact that it's a change in activity is something that we pay a little bit of attention to. And some of this other activity is more what we've typically seen in the past about scanning for services that are open, and we'll chat about some of those in more detail. So let's go on to the 65535 activity. As I said, this actually looks like it's DDoS attack backscatter. And basically, it's the reflection from spoof source addresses, SYN packets that are being sent at a target. The DDoS mitigation function is responding to those with a SYN ACK packet to see if there's actually somebody behind there. And basically what it's doing is those SYN ACK packets are spraying around the network. And the reason this is showing up this way is because the denial of service attack is apparently using a fixed source port of 65535. The actual target address is, or target port here is port 80 TCP, and it's a single address that's under the attack in this case. So we're seeing that activity. It turns out that this particular target attack appears to be a Chinese language blogging site. So perhaps there's I'm conjecturing at this point, but perhaps that is activity to sort of protest or try to suppress some of the blogging activity on that site. Next item here is scan probes on TCP port 0. This is actually registered to a particular application. It's SPL iTunes and SPL, I think, NetTunes. This is not related to Apple iTunes. It's a different application. The thing that's interesting here is that, well, first of all, it's two source addresses that are doing this activity. They're US-based addresses. But it has a characteristic of what we have called in the past a Christmas tree packet. And you can look up on Wikipedia, if you're not familiar with what a Christmas tree packet is about. But effectively, all the flags in the TCP packet are set. From my understanding, I don't have a detailed understanding. Perhaps others on the call can chime in on this. But basically, this is a mechanism that can be used for operating system fingerprinting function. That is, the response that different operating systems provide back to what is, in this case, an invalid packet can help to characterize what the version of the operating system is or the type of operating system that is used. So that's my suspicion that there's sort of spurious activity. This may, in fact, be targeting specific addresses. I didn't dig into that in a lot of detail here, but there's some spurious activity on the network. Not particularly aggressive, so that's why it suggests to me that maybe there's some targeting associated with this, but indicating that they might be trying to do some OS fingerprinting type activities. It may, in fact, be associated with other scanning as well. As I conveyed a little bit earlier, that activity that we're seeing with on port 3074 UDP, it is registered for Xbox usage, and in fact the characteristics do seem to indicate that. That is, on the provider side of it, on the consumer side of it, seem to indicate gaming activity of various types. And the difference here is the number of participants. This could easily be associated with a new game that's been released. I didn't try to research that aspect of this. I would classify it as most likely innocuous. Of course, if you're running an enterprise and you don't want gaming going on your enterprise, this might be something you want to take a look into. Next item is scanning activity. This is based on the number of probes that we're seeing on port 220 TCP. That is a port that's associated with Interactive Mail Access Protocol version 3. The source of this activity is from China, and it's using a fixed source port of 6,000. It's not unusual for us to see a fixed source port in the scanning activity. I think from an operating system point of view, application perspective, it's a much more efficient way to do the scanning rather than generating ephemeral ports and working through the full TCP stack. And that way they can focus their activity that if they get a response SYNAC that comes back from a particular address, they can treat that, basically capture the packet and then treat that as a follow-up activity using a normal protocol. So generally what we see in these cases, they'll use a fixed source port, send the SYN packet. If they get a SYNAC back, they'll respond with basically a SYN reset. And we have seen some cases here. So there are some IMAP servers that are out there, and we've seen this activity. It kind of showed up around October 27th. And you can see there's sort of spikes. The peaks here are up around on the order of 10 to 12 million probes per hour that we're seeing. So it's not particularly aggressive and not very continuous. But certainly if you're running an IMAP server, my guess is that they're doing password guessing attacks against this, looking for opportunities to either steal email or to be able to send email purporting to be somebody that they are not.
One quick thing to point out, Brian, is that the IMAP, this is IMAP version 3, and most of the IMAP servers, even if you're going to find legitimate ones out there, most of them have moved to IMAP 4. IMAP 4 has been out for over 10 years, I think. So this is looking for older servers.
Well, and in fact, that may be an opportunity for them to take advantage of an old exploit. So that's certainly a possibility. Thanks for pointing that out. Next item here, this is scanning activity. There's some scan probes. Again, not particularly aggressive. In fact, this is even a little less aggressive than what we've seen on the IMAP. This is on port 7778 TCP, and that is a registered port. It's registered to Interwise. Now, Interwise is actually a company that was acquired by AT&T several years ago, and it's associated with actually the AT&T Connect service, which is a web conferencing service that, in fact, we're using as we speak to help assemble this webcast. There is an application called Interwise Communications Server that can be operated. I believe it's intended to be used as basically an enterprise-based application to be able to facilitate the web conferencing within an enterprise. It uses port 7778. So this scanning activity may in fact be looking for Interwise communication servers. I'm speculating on that aspect of this, but there are no other applications that I'm aware of that use this particular port. So certainly if you are using an Interwise communication server, you want to pay attention to make sure that you're not unintentionally exposing this port to the internet. And if you are, making sure that you really need to do that. And I have a sort of a follow-up action here that I would like to, I'm going to look into this a little bit more to see if we can find out more specifically what's going on with this activity. Now we're really kind of getting down into the noise here, but these are anomalies that we picked up. I just want to sort of point out we had some activity on port 161 TCP, that's SNMP, Simple Network Management Protocol. What we picked up was basically some short spikes of activity, around 2 million probes per hour, only for a few hours. So we're really kind of getting into subtleties of the scanning activity that are going on. This is not particularly unusual. Certainly if they have SNMP out there that's exposed to the internet, you want to make sure that you're using good security practices in doing that. Another item sort of similar, this is kind of typical of what we've talked about in many cases in the past about password guessing attacks, for example. We've seen some, sort of spurious, a little more aggressive than we've seen in the other cases, or at least certainly more persistent scanning on port 3389. That's the Microsoft terminal server, basically remote access into a Windows machine. So again, potentially looking for avenues into Windows computers, whether it be a server that's exposed to the internet or a home machine or a business that might have things that could be stolen or take over that computer. So the next thing I wanted to show is sort of a traditional, becoming a tradition here, is to show the distribution of the scanning activity. This is the top 10 most probed ports, that is, the most probes that we're seeing on the network. And here we're kind of neck and neck between port 445 now and port 1433. And this is a somewhat new development over the last several weeks here. There certainly are days where port 1433 wins out over port 445 in terms of the number of probes. That's sort of a changing trend that we're seeing. And we've already talked about some of these others. I want to point out that this 123, that's network time protocol, is not security related. These others are oftentimes looking for web proxies. This web is obviously looking for potentially vulnerable websites. 3306, I believe that's MySQL Server. And 3389, we talked about that. That's the Microsoft Terminal Server. And then, as usual, we have port 22 being probed, which is SSH, looking to take advantage of weak passwords. And digging in just a little more on that, I just wanted to give a little bit of a sort of a long-term profile of what's going on with port 1433. I think I've got 120 days of activity showing here. That's Microsoft SQL Server. And you can see that there isn't a particular change in the trend of activity, even though, as I said, it's starting to win out in terms of the number of probes over port 445. But there certainly are certain hours of the day where we see spikes way up. And this is on the order of about 110 million probes per hour, actually exceeding that a little bit. And the spikes are frequent. So there's lots of pretty aggressive scanning activity on port 1433, but it actually is only originating from about a few hundred sources. I think I counted in one case 334 sources or something along those lines, mostly but not exclusively from the China region. And last but not least, this is the top 10 ports that are, in terms of the number of sources that are doing that probing. So as I said, with 1433 that we talked about just previously, it doesn't even show on the radar in this particular case. Far and above all the others is port 445. This ICMP 0 scanning activity that is typically associated with backscatter, associated with other probing activity, or ICMP 8 scanning activity. And or in fact, it could be, DDoS backscatter as well. We have Telnet, again, the Microsoft Terminal Server. This one's eluding me at the moment.
Gaming related.
Gaming related, thank you, John. And again, the web activity, Microsoft applications, SSH, and then 3724, I think, is also gaming related, or at least peer-to-peer related. So with that, I think that concludes our program for today. Any last comments from the team? Questions? Okay, so I'd like to remind you once again, or actually not once again, I'll continue to remind you that if you have questions, feedback, or suggestions on topics that we should cover, you can reach us at cyberthreat@list.att.com. The program is available on the AT&T Tech channel. That's techchannel.att.com. It's also available on YouTube as well as an audio podcast. Just search for AT&T Cyber Threat Report, and we're happy to, I don't know if I'd call this entertainment, but certainly try to inform you for somewhere between a half hour and an hour. I want to thank you, Dave, John, and Jim, for joining us today. I'm Brian Rexroad, and on behalf of all of us here, keep your network safe.